Okay, welcome to this workshop, and let me thank you all for accepting to go on with us on this journey to discover further the results of this major project that ESPON is about to release very soon, dealing with interregional relations. Welcome also to all of you who are attending and joining us online. We already had opportunities to introduce some preliminary results, but this seminar is really the first time when we are able to share a comprehensive overview of what has been produced for the last 2 years. So you've heard about some of the key messages already this morning from the scenarios produced throughout this project in relation with the long-term consequences of the COVID pandemic and also the impacts of the war in Ukraine. This was done this morning by Carlos and Eugenia here in the room. What we would like now to do is to offer you the possibility also to discover the other dimensions of this very, very broad project. One thing you need to know is that this is the biggest project funded under the ESPON 2020 cooperation program. Its ambition was to unveil the interdependencies between the European regional economies in a way that we think was never done before. So, to do so, the team that is here with us in Lille, and that I will shortly also introduce, proceeded with a modeling of regional flows of trade, people, capital, and knowledge. And the results that will be presented to you now are providing what we think is a brand new understanding of the long-term trends, the long-term patterns also that are, we think, also paving the way for renewed territorial strategies, as this was just discussed also this morning. So I will firstly leave the floor to Javier Velasco, who really brilliantly led this project. Javier is the head of the Territorial Observatory of the Government of Navarre, and he will introduce you the key findings of this project. Then we will go for a detailed presentation of the pan-European analysis of trade, people, capital, and knowledge flows, which will be given by Mr. Tomasz Komornicki, who is here also, and who is the head of the Department of Special Organization at the Institute of Geography and Special Organization in Warsaw. And after that, we'll take some time also to present you the specific analysis in relation with the Green Deal and also with the refugee crisis. This will be done respectively by Carlos Ciano and also Eugenia Marignac, that you already seen this morning. And Eugenia will also be accompanied by Konrad Krzapiewski, who is also professor at the Institute of Geography and Special Organization in Warsaw. And at the end of the discussion, we'll welcome online from Finland, Daniel Roth, professor at the University of Eastern Finland, to tell us about how regions also improve their positions in times of uncertainty and what are their policy options to enhance their development strategies. One last maybe word, we'll stop regularly after each presentation and we'll take time for a couple of questions. If some of you in the room or watching us also online feel asking anything to our speakers, then please feel free to do it. You can, of course, make use of Slido app, but you can go also directly on the ESPON website and type directly your question, and we'll take them on board. So now I stop here and I leave you with the team, and please, Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you for your kind words. I had an easy way of leading this, as you said, because of the brilliancy of the members of the team. So that goes first. So guys, if you can come over and join us in the session. Tomasz, Carlos, Eugenia, and Konrad. So, I appreciate it. So, the aim of this project is to create new data on region-to-region interregional relations in Europe, to find new territorial evidence that fits the debate on the potential implications of policy decisions, external shocks, and of course to discuss about territorial cohesion policies. To that end, we had made an incredible effort to overcome the data gaps that we all know that exist at the region-to-region data. We have a well-known picture of country-to-country relations, but to discuss at that level, at the region-to-region level, new data had to be produced. So that's what we did as a first step in this research. Actually, we had a set of recommendations for the official statistic institutions in Europe that could facilitate the update of the ERI datasets in the future. That is, for instance, the first would be to provide a year-to-year dataset that is comparable, covering all the public data that is already available, although it's not published. We found a lot of data that it's not published, although it exists, and we made good use of it. So thank you for that to these organizations. Anyway, we really need that all the data that is produced at the European level has a comparative perspective. We need to compare things, to compare regions, sorry. So our third, and I think the most important one, is that all the data that is produced should be aligned with the different policies, and especially from the territorial cohesion perspective, that's a key issue. We need to compare and we need to align with the European priorities. As we couldn't expect that these things are done with the time constraints that we had in the project, we had to overcome that gaps by using sound methods to develop the new Euregio 2017 input-output tables, to estimate, to combine and to analyze data for the different flows that have been presented already. These flows, the list of flows is extensive and it's relevant. We are talking about the trade of goods. We are talking about the trade of services by mode of transport. We are talking about people's movements, migration, tourism, passengers by mode. We are talking about capitals, FDIs, remittances, and loans. And we are talking about knowledge as well in terms of Erasmus students, its 2020 networks, as well as patents. And I'm going to show you some examples of this before I give the floor to my fellow colleagues. What we achieved in the end is to create a baseline for the 2010 to 2018 that didn't exist before at the region-to-region level, which is comparable to what other countries such as the USA, Canada, or China have been doing for decades in terms of region-to-region data. This allowed us later in our research to apply quantitative modeling in our scenarios. You had a glimpse of what we have done during Carlos' presentation, and you will have more about that on a later section in this presentation. The analysis that we have performed showed many relevant facts, some that we already knew about, and some that are new, of course. Flows, of course, concentrate on neighboring regions, then to regions in the same country, and then to regions in other countries. The flows of metropolitan European growth areas are significant as well. In opposition to that, there is the reality of the small and distant regions that do not participate so well in the space of flows. And that's a key fact that should be considered. We found drivers to be the market size, of course, as couldn't be any other way, but a shared currency and a common language helped the flows. As barriers, we found distance, as was expected, but still, there are exceptions to this fact. Remittances, for example, go in the opposite direction. With regard to flows such as tourism, Erasmus students, they ignore this general framework. They basically go to socially constructed hotspots. I will show some examples about that. To better understand the similarities and differences between regions, we developed regional typologies based on the characteristics of the flows, the absolute and relative intensity, the share at the national level, the regional interdependencies, the number of regions each region connected with, as well as the balance of send and receive flows. after we applied this, a pattern emerged. We found clusters that told a story, that of capital regions, but as well about specialized regions that are remote, regions that are only senders of flows, and regions that are only receivers of flows. These findings should be considered carefully by these regions to overcome limitations, and they are an opportunity for them to understand their position in the space of flows and how they could take into it. And this goes beyond their size, their distance to the core of Europe, and their socioeconomic profiles. There are exceptions to this general framework, as I mentioned. In the case of Erasmus, as you can see here, 3% of the regions concentrate 25% of the flows, and this is mostly in the south of Europe. And regarding H2020, we find that, of course, Brexit took place, and the UK has been dropping since then from the 2nd position to the 7th position in the space of H2020 flows. As I mentioned, there is a network of metropolises that anchors these flows. This is evident in our data. But there is an history of growth of these flows during the baseline period of 2010 to 2018. The flows grew overall at 23%, which is remarkable. About the territorial situation, or what we can see at the territorial level, is that convergence in flows is happening, especially in less developed countries, those that joined the EU after 2004. It can be seen here. There are exceptions to this fact. Luxembourg and Ireland, they keep increasing their intensity in the space of flows because of their exposition to capitals and trade. And for some Eastern European countries, in opposition to what people have in their minds, the migration flows are well below the average because the migration peak happened before 2010. I will now give the floor to my fellow colleague Tomasz Komornicki. He will present his insights on the wonderful job they did on analyzing the pan-European flows, the pan-European analysis of flows. Tomasz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Javier. I hope it is on the same. No, it's probably the other presentation. Well, thank you so much. What I will try to do now is to present just the selected results on the pan-European and I would say pan-flows from that point of view, since we decide that it is necessary, in addition to the analysis of different flows, which was a lot of them, as Javier already said, also to prepare some synthetic analysis, and the added value of that kind of analysis, and our opinion was generally that probably this is the project where for the first time it was possible to compare the different flows, I mean so different as trade, migration, tourism, or Erasmus students' flows, and then to check the position of the particular regions on the European space of flows, so-called Castell's space of flows. And of course, there is a quite big methodological background behind the maps I'm going to show you on the next slides. And for the synthetic flows analysis, we divide the flows for three types, which was, let's say, three baskets: more economic, I mean trade, capital, rather social, based on the people movement, migration, tourism, commuting, and finally the flows of knowledge, where the Erasmus students, patents, and Horizon 2020 project were analyzed, as well as also some territorial dimension. I mean the macro-regional approach, as well as the division for the new and old member states of the Union, and cohesion, non-cohesion regions, as well as also urban-rural, according to ESPON typologies, previous ESPON typologies. And then some very general conclusions, some very general reflection, which could be done based on the results. Here you can see the picture of on the top map. This is the division for the more intensive and less intensive flows in Europe. And I could say that the core of Europe, if we compare this with the traditional measures, with traditional indicators as GDP or others, that it's moving a little bit north. So that means that the countries, Nordic countries, they are involved in the space of flows, even if you take into account the size in the relative measure, they are over-involved in the space of flows in comparison to others. But this is also important that if we look on the other map, that there is much bigger differences between on the regional level if we take into account the typology based on the balance, not just on the intensity. So the question is that maybe the balance determines the real European core periphery patterns. That's one of the hypotheses. But of course, there are differences between particular flows, and this is the synthetic picture. And of course, we also have to remember about the historical factors, and historical factors still matters. And this is, of course, in the case of such a places as Cyprus or Malta, and the strong connection to UK, but also in East Central Europe in some places as well. This new picture of the core periphery is presented here on this clustering analysis, and we have 6 clusters, but 2 of them dominate the European space. And as I said before, this core area is a little bit different. However, we could also find some specific places, and as cluster 5 is just the Luxembourg, and this is of course not just because of the ESPON location, but because of the result of our statistical analysis and the very huge FDI capital flows concentration. When we are talking about the structure and territorial patterns, we could recognize this is another clustering based on the balance, and we could recognize that in addition to in this general division for the, let's say, core and periphery, we could find the third category, or the third cluster. And that's rather the islands of the higher flows intensity, and they are mainly capital cities, but not only. In generally all over Europe, but what is particularly important, this is on the southern and eastern peripheries. And that brings me back to the, let's say, famous picture of Kunzmann and Wegener from the 90s, and the basis of the European Spatial Development perspective, ESDP, from the 90s, where this polycentric development of the all already enlarged European Union was postulated. And to some extent, our analysis is the evidence that that's happened, maybe not at the regional level, but for sure the country level. And so, such a capital cities, I would say that's the gateway cities that which make possible to be present in the European space of flows, also for the surrounding regions. They are clearly visible in countries such as Spain, Portugal, Greece, and also Poland, Romania, or Bulgaria as well. Of course, what was already discussed today, one of the very important aspects is the vulnerability and resilience. And flow, as we recognize that probably the flow's concentration is a kind of the measure of vulnerability. The level of exposure depends on the diversity of external relations, and that means both the sectoral, which is the regions that live have a balanced composition of different flows. I mean, flows of people, economic, trade. That they are simply less exposed to external shock, and those who are dependent on the particular relation, particular outside relation, as migration only or FDI only, they are of course in the worst position. But there are two kind of concentration and two kind of vulnerability or resilience as well. One of them is sectoral, I mean the concentration of the particular flows, but another one, which is still very important, it is the geographical concentration. So I would say that more partners in the geographical sense, the more resilient is the region. So we could find such places in Europe which are where the exposure to external shocks, the external threats, is double. Yeah, because they are concentrated as some Romanian regions. They are concentrated on the migration relation only, and the direction is just southern part of Germany. That's okay. We also check the situation of the distance friction, and the picture is quite clear that the distance is quite low. Distance of flows of relation is in the core of Europe, but we could also see that some other metropolises, these gateway cities I already mentioned, they also create some small regions of the macro regions with the let's say lower distance, and between them we could recognize somehow such a European inner peripheries, and this is the case of Italy and also Western Poland in some places. If we compare the international and domestic flows, we could say that these internal flows are still important. They are still stronger, still bigger than others. But what is important is the internationalization is bigger when it is the places, the regions which are closer to the European core. So if we look for the situation in Italy or in Poland, in this zone around the core of Europe, then the western in Poland or northern in Italy regions, the same is in France. They have more, the importance of the international relation is higher, and more on the peripheral areas, regions, it is not so strong. And that brings me slowly to the first conclusions. That's if we compare the result to if we try to conclude from the point of view of general European integration, of course it is partly it is the evidence. You could say that we prepare some evidence for the success of European integration, but this is generally the success from the economic point of view, and probably less from the point of view of the social relation. And if we compare this with the new territorial agenda for European Union 2030, and to main objective, and in case of just objective, it is rather the evidence that we are partly successful. We have the more balanced territorial development of Europe, more polycentric, but on the other hand, we recognize a lot of overlapping system of flows, imbalances between European regions on the level of on the European level, but also on the country level, and that sometimes could be the price for the convergence which was successful on the country level, but the price was the bigger differences, bigger polarization on the regional level. And finally, the Green Europe objective. In that case, I would say this is not so positive, because if we compare the dynamics, at least of the air transport development and tourism, that means that air transport developed faster than tourism, and that if we compare everything to the aims of the circular economy, it is difficult to find the evidence that the distance of air flows is shorter now than before. Thank you. And then
Thank you very much, Tomasz. Very nice presentation. I think these last 2 slides explain why is it so important to keep updated the ERI data sets, so as to allow us to know whether the cohesion is taking place and whether we are fulfilling the green ambitions of the EU. Anyway, I think now it's time to open the floor for a short Q&A session. If someone on the floor wants to ask anything, please make use that the team is here for you to answer anything in any detail. So, anyone? While we take some valor, I think, is there any in the virtual realm? Nicola, is there any question?
Yes, there are a couple of questions already on the slide. There is one in particular. I will maybe limit it to that one, who said, in general, are regions and regional economies more connected, more dependent from each other than in the past? What would you say, in general, when looking at the last decade?
They are more connected for sure. The space of flows is becoming more dynamic, especially for those regions in less developed. For those regions that are less developed, their intensity of flows with other regions increased in the baseline period, especially for those countries that joined after 2004. Thomas, if you want to complement what I said.
Yes, generally, I have to agree. It's generally we are more connected. However, if we will go in detail, in some cases, especially if we are talking about migration and some part of Europe, it could be not the case. But if we, as an overall picture, it definitely is.
There are, of course, regions that are still increasing the gap. Some top performers, or many of them, are increasing the gap, but convergence is going on. Those regions are increasingly becoming more networked, that's for sure. Okay, shall we proceed with the... Okay, so is there any question? Yeah, I think there's one over there. Is it so? Okay.
I think on one of your last slides, you said that we're not moving in the direction of a circular economy. I wonder if you could sort of explain that a bit more than.
That was partly based on the analysis of transport flows, where we recognize that there's it was maybe it is possible to move back on the slides, but that's for instance, if we compare the air transport and rail transport, and then also if we just compare the indicators of the distance on between 2010 and 2018, the distance is not it's not shorter now than or in 2018 maybe. Now it is shorter because of the next crisis. Yeah, so this is another point. We will move on to that. But if we are talking about the period of the detailed dynamic analysis between 2010 2018, there is no evidence for that we are moving towards shorter distance of flows. I mean both economic and social and as well as knowledge. Yeah. So of course it is not each flow is has the same value from the point of circular economy. This is obvious, but we didn't find the evidence for that.
Okay. Carlos, do you want to add
yes.
something?
Yes. Since we have been working mainly on the trade flows of goods and services and transportation, I think that we also have seen things that are interesting and related with that is Europe is increasing the enrollment in the global value chains. So we have to think that to be involved in the global value chains means that every product that we consume incorporates parts and components that are traveling around the world more oftenly. So the footprint that each one of our goods and services incorporate includes kilometers, and kilometers includes emissions, and emissions incorporates these effects, environmental effects. This is one dimension that is also being possible to analyze now, and it was not possible to be analyzed before the project. And also, the same for tourism. We have opened this black box. Now we have origin-destination flows between any region, so we can also so we can guess the footprint involved in each one of the tourist flows. I just wanted to add this dimension.
Okay, Carlos, thank you very much. I think there is another question, please.
Yep, thank you for a really exciting presentation. I have two things I wonder about. So the period you are analyzing is also the period when, for instance, derogation periods on migration changed. So I was wondering whether you find any impact of major institutional changes regarding the regulation of flows on within the EU on the geography of these flows. And I was wondering whether you had any results on that. And the second one, which is, I think, also very important, is the relatedness of flows. So does knowledge flow where there's a lot of migration? Do you have any results on that yet?
I will start with the second. Yes, we did an econometric analysis on the interlinkages between different flows. I have not the slide here, but we could share through ESPON at some point. It's actually in the main report of our final delivery. There are interesting things that appear. Of course, if I can recall it correctly, knowledge and patents were related. Not so with Erasmus students, but I'm talking in memory because I didn't have that in my slides. Apologies for that. Please be reminded that this is a 2,000 pages project. But anyway, Tomasz, for the first one, can you say something about migration?
For the first one, this is not maybe not the question of regulation, but partly it is. When we analyze the migration flows, that some changes, if you analyze the dynamics on migration flows between 2010 and 2018, I would say that it was visible that different countries, they are on different stage. And that was particularly in East Central Europe, where finally the situation was different for Poland and Romania, for instance. Yeah, and that's one of the. This is probably the result of the already coming Brexit and the stop of the migration to UK. But this is just the speculation at the moment. However, such a differences between the first part of this period and the second, it was visible in case of migration, for instance, and could be partly because of that, but simply could be also just the question of the time from the accession to EU. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to the next part of the session. We selected 5 events to explore future scenarios. We chose the new globalization, which we consider as a meta scenario. We consider the European Green Deal as another scenario. We see it as it is, since it was approved in 2019 as Europe's position to strengthen its values and its green role in the world. And then we considered several black swan events that are associated to this new globalization, which are the Brexit, the COVID, and the war in Ukraine. These scenarios give us an idea of the magnitude of potential shocks. Although they are based on assumptions, I think we have seen it in Carlos' presentation, they reveal trends that need to be dealt with, no matter what's the actual number of the impact. And they show the territorial distribution and what's the sectoral exposition to these shocks. This was possible because of the creation of the Euregio 2017 input-output tables that Carlos briefly mentioned. I guess that he will say something else during his presentation. They tell a story, these scenarios tell a story of the vulnerability of regions and the resilience to external shocks. But they should be considered carefully. Anyway, we saw that the Ukraine crisis was impacting less than COVID, at least until now. But territorially, from the territorial perspective, one affected more the east and the other affected more the south, COVID. And this should be considered and has been carefully considered throughout our different flows. We performed qualitative analysis as well. We did workshops with policymakers in the region of Navarra in Spain, Silesia in Poland, Eastern and Midland in Ireland, and Silesia and South Holland in Netherlands, sorry. And it was quite interesting to see that after they understood the vulnerabilities and the shocks they were exposed to in a quantitative way, things that they could elaborate upon to look for common issues with other regions, not comparing them by GDP or population as it's usually done in regional development strategies, but by knowing their place in the space of flows, it opens new avenues of cooperation between regions that should be explored. I will give now the floor to Carlos. Please, Carlos.
Thank you. Is there any problem if I speak from here? No? With the camera, no problem? Okay. So, yeah, I have to wait a little bit. Okay, sorry. Okay, so thank you very much. Elaborating on what Xavier and my other colleagues have presented, now it's time to go into the European Green Deal, and we are going to contextualize this presentation in the time of conflict that we are living today. This is a joint paper with Julián Pérez and Miguel Ángel, but the report developed in the field of European Green Deal was also developed in collaboration with Conrad, Thomas, and all the IXOPAS team. So it's as always in this big project, is a work of a big team. The outline of the presentation, we wanted to take this scenario as the occasion to bring new topics to the debate. So I'm going to focus on the first 2 points on what we have done in the project. And in the third one, I want to mix a little bit what we have done and what probably we will have to do in the next months as you and all of us, because we have to change the views about what we have obtained in this scenario, what we are obtaining in the other scenarios. First, to contextualize, as you probably know, the European Green Deal is a new strategy adopted by the European by the European Commission and the EU members to fight against the climate change. It's a very wide strategy that incorporates a lot of elements. It was impossible to deal with all of them in one scenario. So at the end, we decided to apply this quantitative tool that was developed in the project, Euregio, to analyze the economic impact of the decarbonization of the European Union and conceive this idea of decarbonization, the substitution of the production and importation of coal and lignite to produce electricity and heating, and to use in substitution other source of energy. So the impacts of this analysis was made in the production, in the dimension of the production, in GDP, employment, as well as CO2 emissions. So this scheme summarized what we did. The good thing of the input-output table is that you have 4 dimensions. You have the sector that produced, the sector that buys, the region that produced, the region that purchased. So at the end, you have the 4 dimensions for all the regions in Europe and completed with the 16 major countries in the world and the rest of the world. So we have the complete vision of the world. So in this case, we are canceling, we are going to deal with 2 shocks. This is the most completed scenario. We built 6 different. But in this case, we are considering the intermediate demand and the final demand consumption of coal and lignite in Europe. In the intermediate demand, you have the sector B in our table. This means mining of coal, supplying inputs to the electricity, to the production of electricity. So we are going to cancel out this one. And then we have also the sector B, the mining of coal and lignite, providing input for heating in the final demand. We are also canceling this out. And now we are going to, keeping constant the amount of energy produced and consumed in each one of the countries, we are going to substitute the value of this